of that ignorance, I've actually had the raft of the experience of the corruption of what we live in. I've been bankrupt, not bankrupt, I've done an IVA. You know, but I did one of those IVAs 15 years ago that people are quite commonplace doing that, but no shame in the problem. Unfortunately, my brief is to explain my pain, and I turn my pain to a gain. You know, I've been married 35 years, 3 lovely children, but blessed with 3 grandchildren. I want to see my grandchildren, which I've lost through ignorance. I'm not losing my main children. I don't press my business to my wife, because my wife is a typical person. She watches EastEnders, Deadenders, the soaps. Has she got a life? Yes, she's got a life. She's got her 3 grandchildren. But my business now is to give my wife her life back, because I made some stupid mistakes. But my wife doesn't beat me up about it. You know, it's been married with a woman, one man, 35 years, and I've ignored that at peril. So it's a question of no payback time. But it's having the right people around you that you can have the right. I've never spoken to people before, so I'm a bit off the cuff. So apologies if I get one, pull me backwards. I said, but I met this gentleman at Luton Market, and I had these stalls up here because I've been doing will writing for the last 15 years. Will writing from a perspective of being in the corporation. You know, and we're all in the corporation where we think, well, we're building a life for retirement. We have a house, the house to be paid off, be mortgage free, but that's an illusion. And then how money is created, people don't understand how money is created. So what I want to do today is just to give you an insight, not to brown bread your brain, because obviously you've had a lot of knowledge this afternoon, but Jack and Jill language, on how the banks have deceived us and how they use a particular word called trust. God we trust and Queen we trust for Queen and country. But I've only met this lady here about a month ago, and her philosophy has given me the vehicle where I want to be around the same sort of people. You know, because the reset is the solution, but we live a life in corporation. So I think I've got the kind of I like to call it get out of jail card. You know, who's ever heard of the game called Monopoly?
Yes.
Would you say Monopoly is in every house in the country, whether it be an old Monopoly set, they're worth money to that apparently, or on an application, a Monopoly app on the iPhone. But Monopoly is going to tell you the truth. You know, get out of jail. They do pay to get out of jail. You know, so crime doesn't pay. Crime does pay. But you know, if you go to a prison, you can then have your justice. All right, you've got your liberty taken away. But what liberty have we got? We've got a form of liberty, haven't we? But the process of my dad was a working man. My mum was a woman to bring up family, but I never had a relationship with my mother because I was the strange one of the family. My brother was academically qualified. I'm not. I went to comprehensive. I don't think there's anything wrong with grammar school. So that's called privilege. And then the 11th bus was abolished. I came out with two O levels. I'm not qualified. But where I sacrifice perhaps a bit of qualification is I make some mistakes. What I don't do is I don't read books. I'm dyslexic. But then I might take I'll take the lawnmower to bits, put it back together again, but I should have read the instructions first. Anyway, but this is my website, so welcome to what I'm about to talk to you about this afternoon. But basically what I do as a business, we empower people just what is kept privileged. Who's heard of the Windsor family? Who's heard of the Grosvenor Trust? Who's heard of the Duke of Westminster? Duke of Westminster is a very, very rich man, and he has a trust called the Grosvenor Trust. The Windsors, as Windsor Castle, goes back to Battle Hastings as well. The Windsor Family Trust is basically what the Queen does. But who's made a will in the audience? Have you made a will?
No.
We all need to make a will under the corporation because we're told by the system that we can do certain things. And the system allows us to do certain things, but unfortunately what they don't do, they don't kind of give us they don't advertise on the back of a cornflakes packet, you must do this. So whilst we're ignorant slaves, and I'm a slave myself, and I hate the word, but we're time for money slaves, exchanging time for money. Who can live on a minimum wage of, is it £8 an hour? £6.50. So by the time you paid your taxes, how much income have we got really in our pocket having paid the taxes?
Not much.
How many taxes do you think we've got in the country?
I quite disagree with
taxes do you think we have in this country?
20%.
No, how many taxes do you think we have in this
Oh,
country?
That's fun,
it's like way too much, I think.
Now, how many taxes? Like income tax, corporation
At
tax,
least
car tax,
5%
petrol
taxes.
tax? 5% taxes.
The major ones, the major like.
How many taxes would you say we've got in this country?
Dozen, couple of dozen.
Without going, there's 360 plus. The latest one is like when there's a pasty, a hot pasty or a cold pasty. So if you have a cold pasty, there's 5% VAT. A hot pasty is 20% VAT. But we're just kind of, did you know that, in fact, how much would you say out of your minimum wage, by the time you've got £10,000 a year, you've actually paid out in taxes? Would you say half your money is taxable? You're a high rate taxpayer? 65% of your money is taxed. So we're supposed to live on the pittance of 35%. So basically what we do, we give people financial solutions that's normally kept for the privilege. Like, you know, through trust, legally pay no tax. As practiced by prime ministers, film stars, celebrities, the banksters, and all the elites. So, my name's Clarkson. So I can have a family trust called the Family Clarkson Trust. And by arranging a trust enables me to protect my home against bankruptcy, not paying the tax man, bankruptcy, divorce settlement, or more importantly, to leave a legacy for your son and your daughter, because basically we want to leave a legacy, because the legacy is what the rich people leave to their family. But the legacies...
Sorry, I just want to ask a question.
Yes?
You say pay no taxes.
Yes?
Right.
We're talking about income tax. You have to pay taxes in this country because we have to have welfare, we have to have
Right, that's
education.
what- yeah, right.
I'm not abolishing taxes because I want to pay the fair share of taxes. But it's paying the income tax. Did you know it's so easy not to pay income tax as a self-employed person? You can actually create a trust where basically a trust is just simply, just imagine this is my business I make my money from. I can create a trust and call it a monkey trust. So, and then I can then put all my income through here into this trust. And then this is a trust I actually set up, but I run a company parallel to my existing business. So I might run myself as a limited company, a limited liability partnership, a self-employed person, or a limited company. And what the rich people do, which is abundant, because the corporations don't pay taxes, and neither do private individuals who are very successful, those who are in the knowledge, they basically put their money through a trust, and the money is held onshore. We're not talking about the Cayman Islands, the Virgin Islands, this is down in London. So you can create a trust, and under a trust arrangement, you can actually create a loan note to yourself. So what you're basically doing, you're recycling income into a trust. The trust is then having the holding of the money through an escrow. Who says an escrow account? An escrow account is called a segregated account, which means it's money that your trust can't be spent on anyone else's money. So your money comes from this trust. You can then take your money out of this trust, and that money, you can borrow money on a loan note to yourself. And guess what? If I was to have £1 million, or say £50,000 to make it worthwhile, if I was earning £50,000, I'd be a high rate taxpayer, would you agree? So that £50,000 comes into this trust, and all I have to do here is just simply account for my money from my loan note to myself. So this company, I'm just now running a loan note to myself, so if I'm creating a debt to me. If I've got run over by a bus, and there's a debt on my own trust, and I hold any asset out of the trust, on my death certificate, the trust, the tax that becomes due incidentally when the death is due, inheritance tax kicks in at 40p in the pound. So if I've got a trust holding a debt of £100,000, I can simply offset that debt to my property and be completely tax-free and leave it to my children. That's how rich people get away with their responsibilities. But more than that, what's so disgusting about our country as we're living today, we have little hidden taxes. Like, have you heard of a parking ticket, for example? The government have just now released more powers to local authorities to give more local authority control, where they can now collect money with what are called extortionate means. But if you create a trust together, you can have a shackles trust. That means all your assets in your property are correctly protected, which means if you get a knock on the door from authority like a bailiff who's got no lawful call, he cannot seize anything from your property to pay for a bill. Because a parking ticket can actually become a life-changing event. A parking ticket can actually mean you can't go to work. Because if you haven't got the £65 in Luton, you pay a parking ticket within 14 days? You pay a parking ticket, you got what I call 14 days. If you pay the parking ticket within 14 days, the local authority are happy to collect that money off you. But what happens if you haven't got the £30 in the £35 in the first place? Is it a parking ticket, or is it food on the table for your children? Or to pay a bill that you can't afford to pay because you haven't told your boy that you've got a parking ticket, and that's around the family, more stress, and the ups and downs. It's the negative influence that go down this way, isn't it? So, and then you then get a parking ticket. The parking ticket then become a bailiff knock at the door. Now you don't know this, but unfortunately you haven't heard about the Late Payment Act. The Late Payment Act was amended last year to allow people to charge interest on, because when someone takes you to court, you can get statutory interest, which is where you can actually get your interest through the court. So have you heard of PPI? PPI is where people had the banks lie to them and made a promise on something that was not fit for purpose, so people were compensated on their money. The law or the government allows people to have interest calculated back, called compound interest, statute interest. Therefore, the reason why the payments on the PPI were so extreme is that people were having the interest element plus also the money that they're actually drawn back. So that's called statute interest. The Late Payment Act was amended last year to allow people now to collect. So if I'm owed you £1,000, you can collect £40 compensation. That £40 compensation, would you pay a solicitor to go and chase £40? You wouldn't. Because unfortunately, we're conditioned to use solicitors to collect money. They don't collect money, they chase money. But unfortunately, solicitors are privileged to be in the seat of law, and we're the underdogs, and we get ripped off from the legal profession. If you're going to get divorced, don't see a lawyer. No, you can sort it out amicably. But a parking ticket can become a removal of the car, which you can't go to work, which means you've lost your income, and it's just a compound from there on. And we've got solutions where people can actually hold on to the car, and if a bailiff comes to the door, you can put the car into a trust. People don't know that. Have you ever noticed it? So if you go down to Mayfair on the Monopoly board, do you want to live in Old Kent Road or Mayfair or Park Lane? It's always the big Rolls Royces parked out Mayfair, swanky doodle dandy, and they've got the parking tickets, but they never pay the parking tickets because they haven't knowledge how not to. But what we basically do as a business, we have a commercial solution in the corporation. We need to be aware of the corporation, but it's not, you can't be free of the corporation, but under reset we can, by becoming more collected, more aware. But whilst we live in this corporate jungle, I have the what I call the get out of jail card, which is helping people to protect what is rightfully theirs. And there's a big pandemic in this country because we're living a bit overweight. I drink water, the aluminium, the fluoride in the waters from the lady previously we spoke. Our food's been poisoned. Our diet's been messed around with. We've got this Morgano food and bits and pieces, which obviously I know that talk about a bit later. Therefore, if you hold an asset in the corporation, the corporate world we live in, and the system provides the care costs, then those care costs could mean the legacy can't be left by the father to his family. Therefore, it's very, very simple to set up a private trust, a family trust, and that family trust protects the whole entirety of your estate. Because what's pandemic at the moment is a lot of people now being fearful. They're having to sell the homes. They're having to, children are ending up cared because there's no will for guardians provided. But I'm passionate about this is the selling the home for care. Because from a personal gain to this position, my wife's mother-in-law passed away, God bless her, 4 years ago. And the experience of the financial pain that I went through in that experience, I would want not anybody to go through that same pain with me. When the wife's mother passed away, before she passed away, we were told she had terminal cancer. And she was going to have 2 to 4 weeks to live. It's over Christmas time, so I said, well, it would be nice to have her at home with the grandchildren, and she can end the days peaceful. But unfortunately, she hung on for 12 weeks. The consequence of that last 8 weeks, she was with the fairies, she wasn't with us. Because she had to have palliative care. And the palliative care was being administered on the basis of morphine, so you can't do that yourself. And although I had to go and get some tablets and morphine tabules and ampules from Boots the chemist, I was told by the police I had to register to the local police station for the amount of drugs that's being kept at the home, because obviously if there was a break-in, I could have been accused of being whatever. But my wife said that she never top and tell her mother. But the consequence, the mother topped and tell the daughter. But how do you... A baby's always, when a baby's born, the mother will do the diaper.
Oh, right.
Okay, and my wife said she wouldn't do that to her mother, but for the love of the daughter she did. Because the care system in this country is barbaric. Because we keep our old people in a pain-controlled environment to a position where it's basically the moral practice, that the dignity's gone out the window. You get strangers to come into your house to look after your mum and dad. And my wife said she never top and tell, but the first experience having the carers round, my wife was mortified. Because the carers were leaving my mother in a diaper that was full of pee and poo. Is that dignity? But that's the care in this country. But unfortunately, my wife could have gone off work, so she would have what's called an unpaid carer. But in terms of the authority way of care, the carer gets paid £100 a week. But if the wife, the mother, has an asset worth £100,000, £200,000 property, did you know that is up for grabs? Because it's what they call you're assessed for care. If you're assessed for care for £22,625, that means I own my house. The house is mine, which means I'm assessed for care, so therefore I have to pay for the care myself. It is completely avoidable. All a person has to do is put the house into a trust. It's very, very dangerous. If I can put the head slide on.
Can everyone see you?
Who has their own house in the audience? Anybody? Okay, well most people have a house of rent. But unfortunately, when people have a house here for example, is held in joint names. So Mr. and Mrs. English, Mr. and Mrs. English average family have a house in joint names. The father was the income earner, and the mother was perhaps the provider, the parent to bring up little Joey, the two little children. But most people are not aware that this exists. So people hold their house on joint names. When a house is in joint names, it's joint ownership, and the only reason that a house has joint ownership means that if I died tomorrow, my wife would get the property in her name, vice versa. She died first, it comes to me. But if I made a will, that does exactly the same thing. But having a joint ownership is how most people are taught or understand that you acquire property. But when you have a house in joint ownership, it's very financially dangerous from a care perspective. Because the local authorities see that as an asset that they can have access to. Have you heard the expression cash rich, asset poor, asset rich, cash poor? Most people in the UK have been so conditioned to be a slave to wages for mortgage for 30 years, for a house that's paid for, retirement hasn't materialised. They get then the pensions with a tax-free lump sum. That tax-free lump sum becomes the way of paying off the mortgage, because unfortunately, who's heard of endowments? Endowments were another Ponzi scheme by the authorities for allowing people to have an interest-only mortgage here and have a savings plan here, and hopefully by the term together, after the 25 years, they should marry up together, so therefore you have a surplus to have your mortgage paid off, or a little bit in a little treat, but they've failed miserably. But under the ownership of the house joint names, we show people there's another way, but the Law Society are not going to try and tell you about this, but there's no what called accountability. Today, now people, the lawyer is now giving people the option to do, which I'm just explaining to. But unfortunately, a lot of people who are in their retirement latter years, or their twilight times, are holding the houses in joint tenancy, and they are not going to be in a position to buy and sell. So by taking the asset from a joint tenancy, what people are not aware of, we have people to put their home into tenants in common. Has anybody heard about that? Understandably, it's not going to be advertised, because whilst we're ignorant, the care authority sees this as their money. But we live in this corporation where, it's supposed to be saving for the future and all our pensions. Who sees pensions as actually going to give people retirement and dignity? Who sees people now going to see their properties being taken away? And I don't know if you're aware, but there's more powers coming to local government at the end of this year, where there's fines being mentioned of up to £10,000, which means if you're a hard-working, honest taxpayer and you have equity in your house, the risk of that ticket is to be paid from the equity of your house, and the local authority, all they have to do is register a cumbered charge on the land title from which the house is registered, and your house could disappear quickly in equity values because the authorities are going to take the equity before you draw it to your children. Is that fair? This is a corporation that we're living under. And have you noticed that the barriers and the restrictions are getting more and more intimidating? So it's the business of having the get out of jail card. So we help people here by having a joint tenancy operations. Therefore, my wife, tenancy, the left-hand side is my wife's share of the house. If the house is worth £300,000, that's an average 3-bedroom box today. Isn't it funny though, that 3-bedroom box 50 years ago, how much do you think that 3-bedroom box was 50 years ago?
50 years ago.
50 years ago.
It's about 3,000.
15.
About 10 to 15,000 pounds. So how can that little box become this huge box 50 years ago? How can that be explained? That was the first one. That was the first scam. Do you know what the second scam was?
Set off the council.
Buy to let. I'm in that trap. I'm 58 years of age now. I've got 10 houses. It makes me an absolute prat. Having bought into the corporate dream of buying property. I didn't buy property because I wanted to. I looked at my pension statement, and my pension statement, I can show you here, the pension was showing me £300,000 annuity. But the expectation of reality is that when I saw my wife 8 years ago, I said, well, it's been growing at 3% the last 15 years. But they're still charging me their fees. And guess what? If I died tomorrow, my wife gets half of my pension. Is that fair? But I can put my pension into a trust tomorrow, that if I die tomorrow, my wife gets 100% of the pot. And guess what? If she's enjoyed if there's anything, what happens to a pension when the wife's died? Goes to the insurance company, the trustees. But we have the vehicle where we can leave it to the family. Because the family trust is what everybody should have, whilst we have this corporation.
Jim, can I just ask you a question around that? When you're talking about, I know nothing about trusts, so when you talk about having a trust, family trust fund,
Yes.
you use it for all of the members of your family?
Yes.
And all of the members of the family can then draw on that and own?
Yeah, I can basically, if I was to buy a property today, let me explain that I can put it into simple terms. This is my house, and let's say if it's 200,000. Right? If that's in joint names, that means half is mine, half is the wife. But joint names, have you heard of civil partnerships?
Yeah.
Civil partnerships means I've got nothing yet to gays, I've got some gay friends, lovely people. But civil partnerships and joint tenancies are the same legal standing. Who knows people who are living as friends, girlfriend, boyfriend together, but they haven't got a piece of paper to say they're a partnership or civil partnership or marriage. Those people are sitting in a time bomb. Because under a marriage, joint arrangement, there's no inheritance tax liability to the spouse on first death, second death. A civil partner has the same rights as a heterosexual person, husband, wife, married. A person who's living separately, but they're living as good as partners, death duty becomes on first death. Which means, if that person here has a sibling from two separate relationships, and there's no will in position, these people can make claim to the other half estate, which means this person could end up losing the home completely. But if it's put into a trust, that protects it. But the reality of having a trust means you're mitigating inheritance tax, which is basically the biggest burden on people today, because we've got what we've got what called second generation wealth now. Is when mum and dad bought their house 50 years ago, the reason why that house here, in terms of property inflation, the house here was 50,000. 50 years on, that house is then worth 250,000. Because what the banks are not, what the system is designed to do, is to create inflation. Therefore, the more inflation of property, the more the banksters can lend you money. And a loan is lent to you on unsecured credit. Who's heard of unsecured credit? Who's heard of a 0% credit card, for example?
What's that?
An interest-free credit card. Do you know what the consequence of an interest-free credit card is? Here's a credit card at 0%. That means I can have that credit card for MB&A Virgin Money is 29 months. That means I have no interest to pay on that let's say if that credit card was for £5,000. If that's £5,000, that means I'm not paying any interest to borrow money, it's interest free. Is that a free deal?
Yeah.
Is that a good deal?
Not
Pardon?
really, because you've got inflation coming up. So
No, forget inflation.
Should be a really good
This
deal.
is £5,000.
Well, in some perspective, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a
This
good deal.
is £5,000 without interest. Because the banks are covering the cost of interest, because they've lent it to you, they're not charging interest to make it money. So with inflation, are they losing money? Yes, they are. But there's a deception behind an interest-free credit card. Because you can get interest-free credit cards up to amounts of £30,000. That means I can have multiple credit cards up to a maximum, say, £30,000.
Not anymore, you can't.
Well, the banks are playing their own skank again. Because we have a boom and bust, So they're playing their own dirty music again. So for MB&A now, we're actually now lending card values of 0% for 29 months. So how can a bank give you £5,000 for nearly 2.5 years? All a bank want you to do is to pay the minimum amount, which would be here 4%. So if I took out £5,000 credit card, and let's say if I cashed that out and I did a cash advance, I took out £5,000 on that credit card, they're going to charge me 4%. So they're going to charge me £200 on the credit card, and they have to maintain 4% as a minimum payment. So 4% on £5,000 would be about, what, £50 a month? So the bank would take that as a payment on my payment, but for me to maintain that debt clean, I mean, who's heard of the credit file? Everybody who borrows money, you're assessed on your credit file. Which means, after 30 days, if I was not to pay this interest, the minimum payment of £50 here, what do you think is going to happen to my credit file if I don't pay that £50 in 30 days? I might have lost my job. Let's assume I've made my job, I'll become redundant. I've got £5,000 of this interest. I've taken a credit card, 0%, because I said, well, this is a good deal. So I can now take that. I'll pay the minimum payment, so I'm now going to be paying £50 a month. So that £200 after 4 months will be paid back. So for me to pay this £200, I'll just have to maintain that minimum payment every month. If I don't pay that minimum payment on the 60 months, so you've got 30 days to get yourself back in order. But what do people do who've got bad debt? they kind of take on more debt.